Hi, this is the History of Israel podcast, an Each My Own Beat podcast. Over the coming weeks, months, and years, we'll be discussing the history of Israel. This is not a podcast to say which side is right, which side is wrong. It's not a podcast to talk about the war which is happening in Palestine. It's just simply the history of Israel. Welcome back to episode 27 of the History of Israel podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the Late Antiquity. Late Antiquity is sometimes defined as the spanning from the end of the Classical Antiquity to the local start of the Middle Ages, from around the late 3rd century up to the 7th or 8th century in Europe and adjacent areas bordering the Mediterranean basin, depending on the location. The popularization of the periodization in English has generally been credited to historian Peter Brown, who proposed a period between 150 and 750 AD. The Oxford Centre of Late Antiquity defines it as the period between approximately 250 and 750 AD. Precise boundaries for this period are a continuing matter of debate. In the West, the end was earlier, with the start of the early Middle Ages, typically placed in the 6th century or even earlier at the edges of the Western Roman Empire. Terminology. The term Spätantike, literally late antiquity, has been used by German-speaking historians since its popularization by Alois Regal in the early 20th century. It was given currency in English partly by the writings of Peter Brown, who survey the world of late antiquity, revised the Gibbon view of the style, and ossified classical literature of the favor of vibrant time of renewals and beginnings, and whose making of the late antiquity offered a new paradigm of understanding the changes in Western culture of the time in order to confront Sir Richard Southern's The Making of Middle Ages. The continuities between later Roman, as well as reorganized by Diocletian, who lived from 284 to 305, and the early Middle Ages were stressed by writers who wished to emphasize that the seeds of the medieval culture were already developing in the Christianized empire, and that they continued to do so in the Eastern Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire, or at least until the coming of Islam. Concurrently, some migrating Germanic tribes, such as the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, saw themselves as perpetuating the Roman tradition, while the Late Antiquity suggests that the social and cultural properties of the classic antiquity endured throughout Europe into the Middle Ages. The usage of the early Middle Ages or the early Byzantine emphasized a break with the classical past, and the term migration period tends to de-emphasize the disruptions in the former Western Roman Empire caused by the creation of the Germanic kingdoms within her borders, beginning with the Phidias and Goths in Antiquia and Aquitania in 418. The general decline of population, technological knowledge, and the standards of living in Europe during the period became the archetypal example of socialite collapse for writers from the Renaissance. As the result of the decline, the relative scarcity of historical records from Europe in particular, the period of roughly the early 5th century until the Carolingian Renaissance, or later still, was referred to as the Dark Ages. This term has been mostly abandoned as the name for a historical epoch, being replaced by Late Antiquity and the periodization of the late Western Roman Empire, the early Byzantine Empire, and the early Middle Ages. The term is seldom applied in Britain. The collapse of Roman rule in the island of the early 5th century is seen as a unique aspect of the European history in the period. This has been the History of Israel podcast. Check back every Wednesday for new episodes. We're available on Apple, iTunes, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. We also have each episode streaming on YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment, and share. We're available on eattomyownbeat.com as well as the History of Israel podcast on Facebook.